I am 80 years old. I lost 52 pounds in 14 months, and for the first time in a decade, my doctor looked at my lab results in silence before telling me I could put the insulin needles away for good. I used to believe that aging was a one-way street toward becoming a ghost. I thought the inflammation in my joints and the heaviness in my chest were just the inevitable taxes on a long life. My doctor called it management, but I realize now it was just a slow surrender. I discovered that my body wasn't failing because of my age. It was failing because I had stopped treating it like it was still alive. Decay isn't a requirement. For me, it was a choice I didn't know I was making. If you feel like you're being written off by the world or your own mirror, I'm asking you to stay here with me. Not to watch a miracle, but to witness a recovery of the self. Subscribe and leave a comment if you are also choosing not to disappear. Your presence here gives this story its meaning. Stay with me as someone who refused to be forgotten. The late afternoon sun, it always hits that old green wingback chair around 4 o'clock. It's a quiet time of day, too quiet sometimes. I'd sit there and I'd feel the fabric against the back of my neck and I'd just wait. That's what my life had become, a lot of waiting. Waiting for the next dose, waiting for the next meal, waiting for the day to be over so I could stop pretending I wasn't exhausted. 238 pounds. That was the number on the scale that morning. I'm 80 years old now, and for a long time I told myself that weight was just legacy, a collection of decades. But when I tried to get out of that chair, that wasn't legacy. That was gravity winning. I'd have to rock back and forth once, twice, 3 times just to get enough momentum to find my feet. And the sound, the grunts I'd make, they sounded like an old house settling into its foundation. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer. I built bridges. I understood how to manage loads, how to calculate stress, how to make sure things stayed upright against the wind. But standing in my own kitchen, that felt like a feat of engineering I was no longer qualified for. My knees, they didn't feel like bone and muscle anymore. They felt like rusted hinges that someone had tried to weld shut. And then there was the cage. That's what I called the kitchen cabinet. Every 4 hours it was the same ritual. The crinkle of the plastic wrapper. That sharp clinical smell of the alcohol swab. It gets under your skin, that smell. You can't wash it off. And then the needle. Just a small thing, really, but it felt heavy. Every time I pressed that insulin into my stomach, I felt like I was signing a confession. An 8.4. That was my HbA1c. My doctor, a good man, he'd look at me over his glasses and say, "Michael, this is just how it is at 80. We manage it. We take the shots. We accept the decline." And I did. I accepted it. I stopped buying shoes with laces because bending over made my head swim and my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stopped walking to the end of the driveway to get the mail because the return trip felt like climbing a mountain. I became a master of avoidance. I'd look at the stairs and think, "No, I don't really need anything from up there." I'd look at the garden and think, "The weeds can have it. I'm too tired to care." I was disappearing. Not all at once, you understand, just in little pieces. The man who used to hike the Sierras was gone. The man who could spend 10 hours on a construction site was a memory. In his place was this guest, this heavy, swollen stranger who lived in my skin and required a pharmacy to keep his heart beating. I remember walking past the pharmacy window last November. It was dark out, and the lights inside made the glass look like a mirror. I saw this old man shuffling toward the door. His shoulders were rounded, his chin was tucked into his chest, and he was breathing so hard I could see the fog on the glass from 3 feet away. I actually stepped aside to let him pass before I realized the man in the window was me. I stood there for a long time, just staring. I went home. I sat in that green chair. I reached for the alcohol swabs. I did what I was told. I lived in those 4-hour increments, measuring my life by the sting of a needle and the depth of the indentation I left in the cushion. I had surrendered. I really had. I thought, "Well, Michael, you had a good run. This is just the slow fade. But that night something happened. Nothing big, just a small thing. I was reaching into the back of the closet for a sweater, and my hand brushed against something cold, something made of heavy leather. It was my old work boots, the ones I wore when we topped out the southbound bridge in '94. They were covered in a thick layer of dust, bone dry, neglected, and for some reason, I couldn't stop looking at them. I didn't pick them up. I couldn't have even gotten them on my feet back then. But I looked at them, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt a tiny, sharp spark of something that wasn't exhaustion. It was a flicker, just a flicker, and I almost let it go out. I put those boots back in the dark. I didn't touch them again for 3 weeks. I told myself that flicker was just nostalgia, a ghost of the man I used to be, rattling his chains. I went back to the green chair. I went back to the needles. But then came Sarah's graduation, my youngest granddaughter. She's the spark in our family, you know, bright, fierce, heading off to study architecture. I wanted to be there. I had to be there. But the stadium, it was a sea of concrete and stairs. I remember sitting in that folding plastic chair, the sun beating down on the back of my neck, feeling the weight of my own body pressing me into the seat. I was 80 years old, and I felt like a structural failure waiting to happen. Then the announcer asked everyone to stand for the national anthem. It sounds like such a simple thing, doesn't it? To stand. But for me, it was a mountain. I gripped the back of the wooden bench in front of me. My knuckles were white, the skin stretched thin over my joints. I pushed. I could feel the sweat starting to slick my palms. My knees, they weren't just aching, they were trembling. I looked at the clock on the scoreboard. 120 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 2 minutes of music. And for every one of those seconds, I was terrified I was going to collapse into a heap of linen and shame right there in row 14. I wasn't listening to the words. I wasn't thinking about the flag. I was just counting. 1, 2, hold on. 3, 4, don't let go. When I finally sat down, I was gasping. I was a structural engineer who couldn't support his own frame for 2 minutes without a mechanical assist. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling like a burden that had somehow learned to breathe. A few days later, Sarah came over. She was beaming, showing me the photos on her phone. "Look, Grandpa, we look so good!" She swiped to a picture of us together after the ceremony. She was glowing in her cap and gown, and next to her there was this man. He was wearing my suit, but it didn't fit. It draped over him like a heavy, ill-fitting tent. His skin had this gray, translucent quality. He looked swollen. He looked like a ghost that hadn't realized it was dead yet. I looked at a photo from just 5 years ago, back when Sarah started high school. I did the math in my head, the kind of quick, brutal calculation you can't ignore. I had gained 40 pounds in those 5 years. 40 pounds of inflammation, of lethargy, of accepting the decline. I wasn't just aging, I was evaporating. I looked at my hands in my lap, then back at the screen. I realized then that accepting my age was just a polite way of saying I had given up on living. I was 80, yes, but I wasn't finished, or at least I didn't want to be. That Monday morning I woke up at 6. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the kitchen looking at the counter. On one side, there was that blue box of sugary cereal I'd eaten every morning for a decade. On the other, a bowl of apples. I picked one up. It was cold, firm, real. I could feel the texture of the skin under my thumb. It's funny how the biggest decisions start with the smallest sounds. I took that cereal box, full, heavy, convenient, and I walked it over to the trash can. I didn't hesitate. I just let it go. The thud it made hitting the bottom of the bin, it was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a miracle. I just had that apple in my hand and a sudden, sharp clarity that I couldn't rationalize away anymore. I looked at the kitchen door, the one that leads out to the driveway, to the mailbox, to the world I'd stopped visiting. I wasn't ready, not really. My knees still hurt, and the cage in the cabinet was still waiting for me at 10 o'clock. But for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't waiting for the end. I was just standing there, on the threshold. I hadn't taken a step yet, but the decision was already vibrating in the floorboards. I stood at that door for a long time. The apple was still in my hand. I didn't go back to the chair. I put on my sneakers, the ones with the Velcro, because I still couldn't reach the laces without gasping, and I walked out. It was 6:15 a.m. The neighborhood was gray and quiet. I walked to the end of the driveway, just to the mailbox, 50 yards out, 50 yards back. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not the good kind of hammering, the you're making a mistake kind. My calves felt like they were on fire, and the humidity felt like a wet blanket over my face. I got back inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and I just stayed there. I felt humiliated. I was a man who used to supervise 500-ton steel pours, and I was defeated by a gravel driveway. I did it again the next morning, and the morning after that. 4 days a week. That was my rule. No matter if the knees throbbed, and they did, I put on those Velcro shoes. By the 3rd week, I made it to the neighbor's oak tree. By the 6th week, I was walking to the corner and back. 12 minutes. That was it. But those 12 minutes felt longer than a full workday. The kitchen, that was the real battlefield. People talk about lifestyle changes like they're choosing a new coat. It's not like that. It's a war of attrition. I spent my mornings chopping. Spinach, peppers, real eggs, real chicken. The sound of the knife. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It became the rhythm of my life. I stopped buying anything in a box. I stopped the microwave meals. If it didn't have a peel, a husk, or a bone, it didn't go in my cart. Was it delicious? No, not at first. It tasted like work. My body was screaming for the sugar, for the bread, for the easy stuff. I felt irritable. I felt old. I'd sit at that kitchen table alone, eating a bowl of greens at 7 p.m., wondering if I was just wasting the little time I had left on earth. Then there was the yellow band, a simple resistance band I found in the back of a junk drawer. I'd stand in the living room, right in front of the TV, and I'd pull it apart. 10 times. My shoulders would shake. I'd do another 10. It felt ridiculous. An 80-year-old man playing with a piece of rubber. But I could feel those muscles, the ones that had been sleeping for 20 years, starting to tingle. It wasn't strength, not yet. It was just a wake-up call. Months 3 and 4, those were the hardest, because nothing happened. That's the part they don't tell you. You do the work, you eat the real food, you walk until your feet ache, and the scale just stares back at you. 235 pounds. For 3 straight weeks, it didn't move. I felt like a fool. I almost gave up. I spent the whole Tuesday back in that green wingback chair, staring at the cabinet with the needles, thinking, why bother? The decline is inevitable, Michael. Just take the shot and eat the cookie. But I didn't take the cookie. I just sat there. And then, on Wednesday morning, I got up and I walked to the corner. Not for the weight. Just because I didn't want to be the man in the pharmacy window anymore. I chose the boredom of the routine over the comfort of the decay. It took 8 weeks, 2 full months, before I noticed something. It wasn't the weight. I was standing in the hallway and I dropped my keys. Usually, that was a disaster. I'd have to find a chair, lower myself down, grunt, struggle back up. But this time I just reached down. I bent my knees. I felt the stretch in my hamstrings, but no sharp pain. I picked up the keys and I stood back up. Just like that. I stood there for a minute, just holding those keys in the quiet hallway. My breath wasn't ragged. My head didn't swim. It was a small thing, a nothing thing. But for the first time in a decade, my body had done exactly what I asked it to do without a protest. I walked to the kitchen. I picked up the knife. I started chopping the carrots for lunch. The door wasn't wide open yet, but the latch had definitely clicked. Dr. Miller, he's a quiet man, methodical. I've sat in that same examination room for 12 years, watching him look at my charts with that same expression of managing the inevitable. But this time, it was different. He didn't say anything for 3 minutes. He just kept scrolling through the lab results on his screen. Then he'd look back at the previous months, then back at the screen. He took off his glasses and let them clack against the desk. He looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Michael, what did you do? I've never seen a reversal like this at 80. I didn't tell him about secrets. I told him about the knife and the cutting board. I told him about the gravel driveway. I told him about the yellow resistance band and the 14 months of mornings where I didn't want to get out of bed, but I did anyway. He just shook his head. Your HbA1c is 5.2. Your glucose is perfect. Michael, you can stop the insulin. Today. I walked out of that office and I didn't go to the pharmacy. I went to the car and I sat there for a moment, looking at my hands on the steering wheel. They didn't look like that ghost's hands in the photo anymore. The swelling was gone. The tremors were gone. I felt like I had just been handed back a deed to a house I thought I'd lost to the bank. I went home and did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I went to the very back of the cedar chest in the guest room. I pulled out a pair of trousers, dark blue denim, heavy weight, that I'd bought in the late 90s. I remember thinking when I tucked them away that I was just being sentimental. I stepped into them. They didn't just fit, they were loose. I had to go into the garage and find my leather punch to make a new hole in my belt, 6 inches past where I started 14 months ago. 186 pounds. That was the number on the scale this morning. I've lost 52 pounds of decline. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway. I didn't turn away. I didn't look at the floor. I looked at the man in the glass. His shoulders were square again. His eyes, they were clear. I recognized him. It was Michael. He'd been buried under all that inflammation and resignation, but he was back. It's 6:30 a.m. now. I'm out here in the park. The air is cool and the sun is just starting to burn through the fog. I'm 2 miles into my walk. 2 miles. Not to the mailbox, not to the neighbor's tree. 2 miles of steady, rhythmic movement. My heart is beating strong, a clean structural thrum that tells me the load is balanced. My knees, they don't scream, they just move. I just finished climbing the small hill by the duck pond, and I didn't even have to stop to catch my breath. I lost more than the weight, you know. I lost the shame. I lost that feeling of being invisible, of being a patient first and a human being second. I lost the fear of the stairs and the dread of the next doctor's visit. I'm 80 years old, and for the first time in a decade, I'm not wondering how much time I have left. I'm wondering how far these legs can actually take me. I see you. I know where you're sitting. I know the weight of that chair, and I know the sound of that sigh you just let out. I know how loud the silence is when you're wondering if it's too late to try. I was you. Just 14 months ago, I was exactly where you are. I thought the slow fade was my only option. I thought the needles were my life sentence. I don't have advice for you. I don't have a plan to sell you. I just have this story. And the simple, heavy truth that the man you remember being, he isn't gone. He's just waiting. That's all I know. That's really all I know. I think I'll walk another mile. It's a beautiful morning.